Most model launches are designed to put a new capability into more hands. GPT-5.6-Cyber, though, is launching with a gate. Access runs through Daybreak Red, and it's limited to authorized advanced cybersecurity research and testing. That distinction changes the whole story. A conventional broad release is aimed at general availability. The product or feature goes out to a wide user base, and reach becomes one of the clearest signs that the launch has actually happened. GPT-5.6-Cyber was introduced through a restricted program instead. From the beginning, its release path has been defined by who's authorized to use it and what kind of work they're authorized to do. So, this isn't simply a comparison between two models. It's a comparison between two very different deployment philosophies, one built around broad distribution and another built around controlled access. To understand exactly what makes this release unusual, we need to compare four things: the intended users, the breadth of availability, the conditions attached to access, and the role of safeguards. First, who's the release actually for? A broad launch targets a wide user base. GPT 5.6 Cyber, by contrast, is intended for authorized advanced cybersecurity research and testing. Second, how widely is it available? Broad releases move toward general availability. This release is restricted through Daybreak Red. Third, what stands between the capability and the person who wants to use it? In the broad release pattern, distribution is the priority. Here, authorization and participation in a restricted program define the route to access. And fourth, where do safeguards sit in the overall design? With GPT 5.6 Cyber, the facts available to us suggest that release design and access design can't really be separated. That's an interpretation, but it follows directly from the way the model was introduced. Put these two paths side by side, and the clearest practical difference is distribution. A conventional broad launch prioritizes getting a model or feature out to a wide user base. Now, that doesn't mean every broad launch is completely unrestricted. It simply describes the basic direction of travel toward general availability and wider distribution. GPT 5.6 Cyber moves in a much narrower direction. OpenAI introduced it through Daybreak Red for authorized advanced cybersecurity research and testing. The finding available to us doesn't provide public details about benchmarks, architecture, pricing, application steps, or specific eligibility rules. So, we shouldn't fill any of those gaps with guesses. What we can say is that the gate is visible in the release description itself. Daybreak Red isn't some incidental footnote attached after an otherwise conventional product launch. It's the program through which the model was introduced in the first place. That makes restricted access a defining feature of this release path, not a minor condition sitting somewhere around the edges. There's also some broader context that helps us interpret this choice. OpenAI temporarily slowed model scaling and paused deployment-oriented reinforcement learning training for 2 weeks, while it strengthened security and monitoring safeguards. That fact doesn't prove why every individual release decision was made, and it doesn't establish any details that OpenAI hasn't stated. What it does show is a willingness to trade some deployment speed for additional work on security and monitoring. That matters because launch strategy is often discussed as though speed is the dominant variable. Train, evaluate, release, and expand. But here, the verified sequence includes an intentional slowdown and a temporary pause, both connected to strengthening safeguards. Seen in that context, GPT 5.6 Cyber's restricted introduction looks consistent with a broader deployment posture in which safeguards can help shape both the timeline and the access model. The careful conclusion here isn't that these events explain everything. It's that they point in the same direction. Immediate, broad deployment isn't always being treated as the only measure of progress. And that brings us to the apparent paradox at the center of this story. Why might a more specialized capability end up reaching fewer people? GPT 5.6 Cyber is intended for advanced cybersecurity research and testing, and its availability is restricted through Daybreak Red. Put those two facts together, and specialization is directly connected with a narrower release path. For a conventional general-purpose launch, expanding the audience can be part of the product goal. But for this specialist system, the intended work is narrower, and access is tied to authorization. That means wider availability isn't the only possible signal that the capability itself is advancing. The interpretation is that as the capability becomes more specialized, OpenAI may narrow the release path rather than treating wider access as the default. That doesn't mean every specialist model will follow this pattern. It also doesn't mean Daybreak Red will necessarily become permanent. It means this particular release gives us a concrete example where specialization and restriction arrive together. And the stakes are practical. The release model determines who can test an advanced cybersecurity system, under what conditions that testing takes place, and whether an increase in capability leads to broader availability or tighter control. So now, let's return to the central comparison. A conventional broad release aims for general availability and prioritizes distribution to a wide user base. GPT-5.6-Cyber doesn't follow that pattern. It was introduced through Daybreak Red, with access limited to authorized advanced cybersecurity research and testing. The difference isn't merely the size of the initial audience, it's the role access plays in defining the release itself. If authorization and participation in a restricted program determine how a model is made available, then access control starts to function like part of the deployment architecture. That's the key analytical shift. Instead of treating the gate as paperwork that merely surrounds the product, treat it as one of the mechanisms through which the capability is actually deployed. None of this tells us everything about the model itself. The verified findings don't support claims about its internal architecture, its performance, its pricing, or its future availability. But they do support a clear verdict about the release path. GPT 5.6. Cyber isn't being introduced as a standard broad product launch. The open question then is whether this is an isolated release pattern or the beginning of a recurring one. Right now, the verified position is narrow and specific. GPT 5.6-Cyber is restricted to Daybreak Red for authorized advanced cybersecurity research and testing. We shouldn't assume that this restriction will become permanent, and we shouldn't claim that every future specialized model will use the same structure. Still, this gives us a useful signal to watch. If authorization-based programs start recurring around highly specialized models, that would suggest a deployment strategy in which access becomes more selective as capabilities become more focused. For now, the best way to understand GPT 5.6-Cyber isn't as a standard product launch with an unusual sign-up process. It's better understood as a capability whose restricted access is central to the way it's being released. Subscribe to Neural Stack for more clear-eyed analysis of AI, software development, and open source. And if this comparison changed the way you think about model launches, share your take in the comments.